Marco Costello sat in the corner booth of Trattoria Antica, a restaurant he owned but never appeared on any paperwork for. It was his sanctuary. His castle keep in a city of concrete and glass. The lighting was low, the Chianti was old, and the shadows were long. They were friends, the shadows. They knew how to keep secrets. His lieutenant, Leo, stood near the door, a mountain of a man in a tailored suit, his eyes scanning every person who entered. He was a human wall, built of loyalty and muscle. No one approached Marco's table without an invitation. The rule was as solid as the marble floor. Tonight, the rule was broken. The man who broke it was not a rival. Not a cop. Not a threat of any kind. He was old. So old his shoulders seemed to bend under the weight of the air itself. His clothes were thin, a janitor's uniform worn pale with 1,000 washings. He held a small, battered case in his trembling hands, clutching it like a holy relic. He shuffled past the maître d', who was too stunned to stop him. He walked past Leo, who tensed, ready to intercept, but hesitated at the sight of the man's profound frailty. The old man stopped at Marco's table. The air in the restaurant thickened. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations died in throats. Everyone watched. Everyone waited for the explosion. Marco looked up from his wine glass, his eyes dark and unreadable. He had a face carved from granite and experience, a face that had seen everything and forgiven nothing. He was Marco the Bull Costello. Men of substance trembled when he entered a room. This man, a ghost in threadbare clothes, simply stood there, his breath coming in shallow wisps. "Can I help you?" Marco's voice was quiet, a low rumble that carried more weight than a shout. The old man nodded, his hand shaking as he opened the small case. Inside, nestled on worn red velvet, was a harmonica. It was old and tarnished, the metal worn smooth by time and touch. They say you're the man who can fix things," the old man whispered, his voice raspy. "I don't have any money. But I can play. I can play you a song. A good song. And maybe you could help me." Leo took a step forward, his hand moving to the old man's arm. This was the end of the interruption. But Marco raised a single finger. Just one. Leo froze. The finger was an order more absolute than any law passed by the state. It meant wait. It meant listen. Marco Costello, who had not deviated from his routine in 20 years, who valued order and silence above all else, broke his own protocol. He looked at the old man, at the desperate hope in his watery eyes, and at the tarnished harmonica. And he gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Marco hadn't shown an ounce of pity in decades. His heart was a fortress, built stone by stone from loss and necessity. But something about the old man, something in the way he offered the only thing he had left in the world, was a key turning in a lock Marco had forgotten existed. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about good and evil. If you are enjoying this story, please take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe so you do not miss what is coming. And let us know where you are watching from in the comments below. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. The old man sat down. He sat on the edge of the plush leather seat as if he were afraid it might swallow him whole. He placed the harmonica on the table, a humble offering on an altar of power. Marco studied him. He saw the worn-down knuckles, the stooped posture of a life spent mopping floors and emptying trash. He saw the cheap, cracked leather of his shoes. This was a man the world had forgotten. A man who had become invisible. Yet, here he was. In the most exclusive, most dangerous restaurant in the city, sitting across from its most dangerous man. "Your name," Marco said. It was not a question. "Samuel," the old man replied. "Samuel Bell." "And what do you need fixed, Samuel Bell?" Samuel swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the opulent room. He seemed to shrink under the weight of the silence. "It's my wife. Eleanor. She's sick. Very sick. The bills, they just keep coming. Like a flood. Marco swirled the wine in his glass, the deep red liquid catching the light. He said nothing. He simply listened, a skill that had made him more powerful than any weapon. I borrowed money, Samuel continued, his voice barely a whisper. From a man. He seemed nice at first. But now he wants more. So much more than we agreed. He says if I don't pay by Friday, he'll take our house. He looked down at his hands. It's the only home Eleanor has ever known. It's where we raised our boy. The name of the loan shark was unimportant. Marco knew the type. Vultures who circled the weak, the desperate. Men without honor. Men without a code. They were a stain on the city, a rot that Marco occasionally had to cut out. But he did it for business, for order. Not for charity. Charity was a weakness he had burned out of himself long ago. The last time he had felt its sting was in 1975. The year his father died. The memory came unbidden, a ghost slipping through the fortress walls of his mind. His father, Antonio Costello, was not a bull. He was a songbird. A man who could make an accordion weep and a guitar sing. He played in smoky bars for pocket change and applause, his heart full of music and his pockets full of nothing. He believed in the goodness of people. He believed a song could solve anything. The world had proven him wrong. He got sick. The same way Samuel's wife was sick. A slow, expensive decline. Antonio had refused to let Marco, then a young man just starting to make his way in the city's underbelly, get involved. He refused to take that kind of money. So he borrowed from a man just like the one Samuel was describing. The loan shark had bled him dry. Took his instruments. Took his pride. In the end, there was nothing left. Marco found his father in his small apartment, slumped in a chair, the final eviction notice clutched in his hand. He was gone. Marco was 21 years old. He stood in that cold, empty room, the silence screaming at him. And for the last time in his life, he cried. He cried for the gentleman the world had broken. He cried for the songs that would never be played. Then he stopped crying. And he made a promise. He would never be weak again. He would never be powerless. He would become the predator, not the prey. He would build an empire so vast and so strong that the world could never break him. He had kept that promise. He was Marco the Bull Costello now. A name whispered with fear and respect. He controlled shipping lanes, construction unions, and the quiet loyalties of 100 powerful men. He had everything. But he had not heard his father's music in nearly 50 years. He looked back at Samuel Bell. At the desperate old man with his cheap harmonica. He saw a reflection he had tried to bury for a lifetime. This man you borrowed from, Marco said, his voice level. His name. Risley, Samuel said. Sal Risley. Marco's eyes narrowed slightly. Sal the Weasel Risley. A parasite. A man who operated in the gutters, outside the established families, because no one with any self-respect would work with him. He was known for preying on the elderly, the sick, the truly desperate. He was a violation of the unwritten rules. There were rules, even in their world. Lines you did not cross. You did not touch civilians who were not part of the game. You did not harm children. And you showed respect for the old, for they had seen more winters than you. Risley spat on all of it. How much do you owe him? Marco asked. Samuel flinched, as if the number itself caused him physical pain. He says, with the interest, it's $20,000 now. The original loan was only 5-inch. Marco nodded slowly. The math of predators. And you want me to fix this, Marco stated. In exchange for a song. Samuel's eyes pleaded with him. It's all I have. Eleanor, she loves my music. When I play for her, sometimes she smiles. She forgets the pain for a little while. It's the only medicine I can still afford to give her. He described their life. A quiet life, lived in a small house with a garden. He worked the night shift at a downtown office building, cleaning up after men who made more in an hour than he made in a month. He would come home in the morning, make Eleanor her tea, and sit by her bedside. He would tell her about his night, about the strange things people left on their desks, about the city lights from the 30th floor. Then he would play his harmonica. He played the songs she remembered from their youth. Old tunes from a time when the world seemed kinder, simpler. For a few minutes every day, the sterile smell of medicine in her room would be replaced by the sound of music, a sound that held 60 years of love within its simple notes. The harmonica was a gift from her, on their first anniversary. He had carried it in his pocket ever since. It was a part of him. A part of them. "She's at the hospice now," Samuel said, his voice cracking. "I visit every day. After my shift. I play for her. The nurses, they let me. They say it calms her." He was not a man asking for a handout. He was a husband trying to hold on to the last shred of dignity and peace he could provide for his dying wife. The money was just a tool. The house was a vessel for memories. The music was everything else. Marco felt the old fortress wall inside him tremble. A crack appeared. A single, hairline fracture. The memory of 1975 was no longer a ghost. It was sitting across the table from him, wearing a janitor's uniform. He looked at the harmonica on the table. It was not just a piece of metal. It was a promise. It was a lifetime. It was the only weapon this man had against the cruelty of the world. And he was offering it as payment. Marco's world was built on transactions. Money for goods. Favors for loyalty. Violence for disrespect. Everything had a price. The ledger always had to be balanced. What was the price of a man's soul? What was the value of a wife's last smile? These were questions Marco had not allowed himself to consider in a very long time. They were dangerous questions. They were the kind of questions his father would have asked. He looked over at Leo, who stood perfectly still, his face a professional mask of indifference. But Marco knew his man. He saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. The boss was entertaining a ghost. The boss was listening to a sad story from a nobody. This was not the way of things. The entire restaurant was still quiet. The other patrons, men of influence and wealth who paid a premium for the privacy of this room, were watching a drama unfold that was more compelling than any business deal. They were watching Marco Costello, the unmovable object, being met by an impossible force. The force of pure, undiluted desperation. Marco made a decision. It was not a business decision. It was something else entirely. Something older. "Play," Marco said. The word was soft, but it echoed in the silence. Samuel looked up, startled. "Here? Now? Here? Now?" Samuel's hands trembled as he picked up the harmonica. He wiped the mouthpiece on his sleeve, a nervous, habitual gesture. He lifted it to his lips. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was no longer in a fancy restaurant. He was by Eleanor's bedside. And he played. The song was simple. A folk tune, slow and mournful. It was not technically brilliant. A few notes were shaky. But it was filled with a lifetime of emotion. It spoke of love and loss, of quiet mornings and long, difficult nights. It was a sound of profound sadness, yet underneath it, there was a current of unwavering devotion. It was the most honest sound Marco had heard in 50 years. The music filled the restaurant. It seeped into the expensive woodwork and the velvet curtains. It silenced the clinking of ice in glasses. It silenced the city outside. For 2 minutes, there was only the sound of Samuel Bell's harmonica. Marco closed his eyes. He did not see the restaurant. He did not see Leo, or the other patrons. He saw a small, cluttered apartment in 1975. He smelled his mother's cooking. He heard his father, Antonio, sitting at the kitchen table, playing this very same song on an old, battered accordion. His father would look up and smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that Marco had not seen on another human face since. The music was a key. It unlocked a room in his heart that had been sealed shut, the door bolted, the windows boarded over. Dust motes of memory danced in the air. The feeling of his father's hand on his shoulder. The sound of his laughter. The warmth of a world that no longer existed. The fortress wall did not just crack. It crumbled. A single, hot tear escaped his left eye. It traced a path through the weathered landscape of his face, a path it had not taken in nearly 5 decades. He did not wipe it away. He let it fall. A silent testament to the song, to the memory, to the man sitting across from him. The song ended. The last note hung in the air, shimmering, before fading into the profound silence. Samuel lowered the harmonica, his eyes still closed. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Marco opened his eyes. The tear was gone, vanished as if it had never been. His face was granite once more. But something inside him had been irrevocably altered. The ledger he had lived by his entire life was now meaningless. "You can go home, Samuel," Marco said, his voice quiet but firm. "Your wife's medical bills will be taken care of. All of them. And Mr. Risley will not be bothering you again." Samuel's eyes shot open, wide with disbelief. "But how?" "You paid," Marco said, nodding toward the harmonica still in Samuel's hand. "The price was fair." He stood up, signaling the end of the audience. He placed a hand on Samuel's frail shoulder. It was a gesture he had not made to a stranger in his entire adult life. "Go be with your wife. And keep playing for her. It is more important than any medicine." Leo, moving with silent efficiency, escorted a stunned and weeping Samuel Bell out of the restaurant, pressing a thick envelope of cash into his hand for a taxi and whatever else he needed for the night. Marco stood by the table for a long moment, looking at the empty chair. Then he turned to one of his men who had been waiting in the wings. "Get the car." He walked toward the door, his long coat settling around him like a shroud. He paused beside Leo. "Find Sal Risley," he said, his voice dropping to a temperature just above freezing. "Tell him I want to discuss a new client. And his retirement." Leo nodded, his expression grim. He understood perfectly. This was not business. This was a cleansing. The drive to Sal Risley's office was silent. Marco stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. The city was his. He had conquered it, tamed it, bent it to his will. He had done it all to build a wall around the memory of that helpless boy in the coal department in 1975. Tonight, a janitor with a harmonica had walked right through the front gate. Sal Risley's office was above a pawn shop in a part of town that respectable people avoided after dark. The stairs were sticky. The air smelled of desperation and stale cigar smoke. This was the natural habitat of the weasel. They did not knock. Leo kicked the door open, the cheap wood splintering around the lock. Sal Risley was sitting behind a metal desk, counting a pile of greasy bills. He was a small man with shifty eyes and a suit that was trying too hard. He looked up, his face a mask of shock and anger. "What the hell is this?" he squealed. "Do you know who I am?" Marco stepped into the room, and the air seemed to get sucked out of it. Risley's anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, primal fear. He knew the face. Everyone knew the face. "Mr. Costello," he stammered, scrambling to his feet. I didn't know. If I knew you were coming." "Sit down, Sal," Marco said quietly. He walked over to the desk and looked down at the money, then at Risley. "You've been busy." "Just business, Mr. Costello. You know how it is." "I do," Marco said. "I know all about business. Which is why I'm here. I'm here to talk about your business model." Leo closed the broken door and stood in front of it, his arms crossed. The escape route was sealed. I have a new client, Marco continued, his voice dangerously calm. An old man. A janitor. His name is Samuel Bell. Do you know him? Risley's face paled. He started to sweat. Look, Mr. Costello, it was just a small loan. The old man got behind, that's all. Standard procedure. Standard procedure, Marco repeated the words, tasting them with disgust. Your procedure is to take a $5,000 loan and turn it into $20,000. Your procedure is to threaten to take the home of a dying woman. That is not procedure, Sal. That is garbage. Marco reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of paper. It was the loan agreement Samuel had given him. He unfolded it and placed it on the desk in front of Risley. This paper is an insult, Marco said, his voice a low growl. It's an insult to this city. It's an insult to the way real men do business. And because you operate in my city, it is an insult to me. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. His eyes bored into Risley's. We have rules. Unwritten, but they are more important than any law. We do not prey on the weak who are not in the game. We do not go after the sick. We do not torment the elderly for pocket change. It is a matter of respect. Something you know nothing about. Risley was trembling now, a cornered rat facing a lion. I'm sorry, Mr. Costello. I didn't know he was with you. I'll tear up the loan. It's done. Forgotten. Marco smiled, but it was a terrifying sight. It held no warmth, no humor. It was the baring of teeth. Oh, it's not just his loan, Sal. It's all of them. He straightened up. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to take every loan you have with every desperate soul like Samuel Bell. You are going to mark every single one of them as paid in full, then you will send them a letter of apology. Risley's jaw dropped. But that's everything. That would ruin me. That is the point, Marco said coldly. You are a disease, Sal. And I am the cure. After you have cleared your books, you will pack a bag. You will leave this city. You will not come back. If I ever hear your name in this city again, if I hear that any of the people you have tormented have so much as a hangnail out of place, I will find you. And our next conversation will be much shorter. The threat was unspoken but absolute. Permanent. Do we have an understanding? Marco asked. Risley, sweating and shaking, could only nod, unable to form words. Good. Marco turned and walked to the door. He didn't look back. Leah will stay with you to make sure you complete your paperwork. He is an excellent motivator. He walked out of the office and down the sticky stairs, back into the cool night air. He had not raised his voice. He had not laid a hand on the man. He had not needed to. His presence, his reputation, was weapon enough. He had cleansed a small part of his city. He had balanced a different kind of ledger. It was not for profit. It was not for power. It was for a song. The next morning, Leo delivered an envelope to Samuel Bell's small, tidy house. Samuel opened it to find the loan document, stamped in red ink, paid in full. Beneath it was a cashier's check for a sum of money that made him gasp. It was enough to cover Eleanor's hospice care for the rest of her days, and then some. There was a small, unsigned note. It contained only 4 words. Keep playing for her. A week later, Samuel Bell was waiting outside Trattoria Antica when Marco arrived for his dinner. He was holding a small, wrapped package. Mr. Costello, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. You saved us. Marco simply nodded. Is your wife comfortable? Yes. They're taking wonderful care of her. And I play for her every day. She smiled yesterday. A real smile tears welled in the old man's eyes. I wanted to give you this. The money, it's too much. We can't accept it all. Marco gently pushed the package back toward him. The money is an investment. In the music. Samuel looked down, defeated. Then he had another idea. He unwrapped the package. It was his old harmonica. Then take this, he said, holding it out. It's the most valuable thing I own. It's 60 years of my life. It belongs to you now. You earned it. Marco looked at the worn, tarnished instrument. He saw the faint imprints where Samuel's hands had held it for thousands of hours. He saw the scuffs and scratches, each one a memory, each one a song. He hesitated for a moment, then he took it. The metal was cool in his hand. It felt heavier than it looked. No, Samuel, Marco said softly. The song you played in my restaurant, that was the payment. It was worth more than all the money in this city. It reminded me of something I had forgotten. Samuel looked at the feared crime boss, the man whispered about in the shadows, and saw something else entirely. They say you are a bad man, Mr. Costello. The papers, the police, they say terrible things. But what you did was a good thing. Marco's face was unreadable. He looked past Samuel, at the sprawling city he commanded. I am what this city needs me to be, he said, his voice a low rumble. Some nights, it needs a bull. Some nights, a ghost. He paused, turning his gaze to meet the old man's. For you, I was a man who appreciates good music. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It was blank except for a single phone number, printed in stark black ink. Take this, he said, pressing it into Samuel's hand. If anyone ever bothers you or your wife again, for any reason, you call this number. Anyone. A doctor, a landlord, a noisy neighbor. It does not matter. You call. It will be taken care of. It was a promise of absolute protection. A shield for life. Samuel Bell clutched the card and the harmonica, tears streaming freely down his face. He could only nod his thanks. Marco watched him walk away, a frail old man with his shoulders a little less stooped, his step a little less shuffling. Then he went inside for his dinner. 2 years passed. The seasons turned. The city grew and changed. But some things remained constant. On a warm spring afternoon, in a small city park, Samuel Bell sat on a bench next to his wife, Eleanor. She was in a wheelchair, frail and quiet, but her eyes were clear. She was home. The money had allowed for the best private care, for nurses and equipment that made her final years ones of comfort and peace, in the house she loved. Samuel took out a harmonica. It was not the old, tarnished one. This one was new, a beautiful chromatic model made of pearwood and chrome. It had arrived in the mail one day, a few months after his meeting with Marco, in an anonymous package. He lifted it to his lips and began to play. It was a cheerful tune this time, a song about sunshine and new beginnings. Eleanor closed her eyes and a gentle smile graced her lips. They were safe. They were together. And they had their music. Miles away, in a penthouse office overlooking the entire city, Marco Costello stood before a large, mahogany desk. The office was a monument to his power. On the walls were framed photos of him with senators and movie stars. On shelves were awards from civic associations he secretly funded. It was the armor of his empire. But in the very center of his desk, on a small, velvet-lined stand beneath a protective glass dome, sat a single, old, tarnished harmonica. It was his most prized possession. Leo entered the office with a stack of reports. He saw his boss staring at the object on his desk, as he often did. Leo had been with Marco for 30 years. He had seen him face down assassins, negotiate with rivals, and order acts of terrible necessity without a flicker of emotion. But he had never understood the harmonica. "Boss," Leo said gently. "Should I have one of the cleaners polish that thing? It's looking a bit worn." Marco did not turn. "Leave it, Leo," he said, his voice softer than usual. "It's perfect as it is. Every scratch on it tells a story." He had not cried that night in the restaurant. Not in front of Samuel, not in front of his men. The bull could not show such weakness. But later, alone in this very office, long after the city had gone to sleep, he had taken the harmonica from his pocket. He had held it in his hands, this simple, cheap instrument that had undone 50 years of emotional fortification. He thought of the old man's simple courage. He thought of his own father's broken dreams. He thought of the pure, honest music that had cut through all the noise of his life. And the tears that had been held back since 1975, the tears for a lost father and a lost boy, had finally fallen. They fell onto the worn metal of the harmonica, a quiet, solitary baptism. He had built an empire to protect himself from the world, only to learn that the strongest shield was a memory, and the greatest treasure was a simple song, freely given. Courage, he had come to understand, was not always a roar. Sometimes, it was a quiet old man with trembling hands, walking into a lion's den with nothing but a harmonica, determined to play a song for the woman he loved. And power was not always a fist. Sometimes, in the hands of the right man, it could be a shield for those who had none. In a world of predators and prey, of bulls and weasels, Marco Costello had been reminded of a truth he had long ago buried. That the most valuable currency was not money or fear. It was not loyalty or respect. It was kindness. And the memory of what it felt like to be truly human.